Hi, this is Jim with Adirondack Technology. I'm going to take just a minute today to kind of run over power over Ethernet and some of the pitfalls, some places you want to stay away from. Power over Ethernet is going to power most of your IP cameras today. And the lion's share of them are coming through. There's a couple different classifications of POE. You've got 1, 2, 3, and 4. Primarily with IP cameras, we're going to want to stay in the class 3 area, which is 15.4 watts. Class 2 is 7 watts. That will support an indoor IP camera with no infrared, just a simple indoor fixed lens type camera. I don't know if I would want to run an autofocus indoor camera off of a 7 watt switch. Class 2, I would probably want to step up to a class 3 for that. But for your fixed indoor simple cameras, you could probably get away with 7 watts. That's what this is right here. This is just a simple netgear unit for POE. If we're going to run into infrared and we're going to be 200-300 foot runs on most of your cameras, and I want to step up to class 3, and that's what I'm going to tell you to be 99% of the time. You're going to want to stay with class 3. That's 15.4, and the other thing you got to kind of keep in mind is you look at a switch and it'll say class 3, but remember, we're doing IP cameras and they actually could draw 15.4 watts. Well, their draw is never going to be more than 12.96 because that's what the draw is at the camera. But your total supply would be 15.4 because part of the 802.3 compliant statute says that this has got to put out 15.4 and the camera can never draw any more than 12.96. That way you've got some built-in room in there for wire loss and drop and so forth. So if you're going to pick a switch and you're working on a project, you want class 3, you want 15.4, and then what you want to do is you want to take the 15.4 and you want to times it by the total amount of ports that they have on the switch. So if it's a 10 port switch and it's a class 3 and it says 15.4, quick math is going to tell you should have a total availability of 154 watts on the product. Now, it'll tell you, you got to dig and dig and dig. I don't know why they hide it on these switches, but they do. You're going to have to dig through the paperwork and find it. And you'll find a lot of switches. Let's go back to the same example. 15.4 watts, it's a 10-port switch, but it only has a total availability of 100 watts. Well, then, technically, is it really class 3? Well, it is. But what it does is, in the process of powering Ethernet appliances, there's a marriage, there's a configuration, there's a communication and a handshake that takes place between the network appliance, which in our case would be the IP camera, and the switch. And how it works is the switch turns on and it sends out a very minute amount of voltage, 12 volt DC, very, very small amount of voltage, and it just cycles it down the line and it looks for resistance. Well, if it's a POE product, there's going to be resistance on the line, and this is going to sense it. At that point in time, this product, again, this is all under the 802.3 compliant statute, this product is going to send 15.4 volts right down the line. At that point in time, whatever you have plugged into it is going to turn on. When it turns on, the camera or the phone or whatever the appliance is, in order for it to be 802.3 compliant, it has a part, and what it has to do is it has to turn on and create the most amount of power draw that it could ever create. And at that point in time, it's either going to be class 2 or class 3 for the lion's share of what we're going to talk about here today. And that would be either about 6 watts or 12.96 watts. And this registers that. And it says, okay, this is class 2, this is class 3. So if it's a class 2 camera, like an indoor fixed camera, could possibly be a class 2. This is going to say, okay, 15.4 watts available on every channel, but this is class 2 product. So we're just going to leave that alone and we're going to ship them only 7 watts. So that leaves that power available for some of the other ports. So that's why you have to be careful when you pick a switch. If it is class 3, you have to make sure it has a total available power. You walk into a large manufacturing facility and you're going to have a lot of 200-300 foot runs. You're going to want the ability for this switch to be 15.4 on every single port and not go over the total available wattage on the product. So we look at Total amount of ports, they usually come as, like a 4 or 5 port switch. Then we step up usually to 8 with an SFP upload, and then we move to a 16 and usually a 24. And there's not a huge difference in price from the jumps. I mean, the 24 is a lot more expensive than the 4, but from like an 8 to a 16, it's not a big difference. So if you're putting, let's say you're going to be installing 12 cameras, I would say, excuse me, let's say you're putting in 8. If you're putting in 8, I would go to a 16. That way you've always got a lot of power available. If you're going to be installing 16 cameras, I would go to a 24 port switch. Not that big of a jump, but I like to plan for the future, number one, and number two, I always want to make sure I have plenty of power. So you kind of got an idea of the power, and there's 2 different products that can supply the power. We'll switch gears here a little bit. You can either use a switch or you can use a midspan. The difference between a switch and a midspan is with a switch, we can have one wire coming in that goes back to the head-end unit. And then we can have multiple cameras that all come out of this switch. So we could place this switch, let's say, a couple hundred feet away from the head-end unit, and we could pick up the 5, 6, 7 cameras that are in that area, and this would work great for that. Now, if you walk into like a school or a university or a hospital and they have an existing network, they're probably going to have network appliance criteria, and they're probably going to want you to put products on their network. I don't like that, but in some cases we have to. Now, in those cases, many times they don't have a power over Ethernet switch. They'll have a big Cisco switch, but it doesn't supply power. Or let's say it supplies class 2 power, and we know that we want to stay on class 3. At that point in time, we'll put a midspan in. And how the midspan works, it's a product you would set right on top of the switch, and you would run out of the switch with, let's say we're going to do 5 cameras. You'd come out with 5 wires, go into the midspan with 5 wires. And at that point in time, the midspan would inject the power, and then we would come out of the midspan with 5 more wires and go out to our cameras. So there's a little bit more wiring with the midspan, but you don't have to switch out their network appliances. So with that said, you've got kind of a rough idea how the power over Ethernet works. You've got a rough idea of how to select a switch. If you have any questions or whatever, always feel free to reach out to me. I'll be glad to answer any question you have. My guys will tell you that whatever you need, just call me. I'll do my very best to help you. And it's 518-210-7536. And again, it's Jim Starr with Adirondack Technology, and I thank you for your time.